Hello again and welcome. My name is Lizzie Lithgow. I'm the AVP of Marketing here at Carnegie. Just want to thank you all for joining today's webinar, Search Party Experts Spill All on the New Student Search. Before I hand things over to our moderator, would like to do a quick audio check. If a couple people in the chat wouldn't mind using the raise your hand feature so that we can know that our audio is coming in loud and clear, would really appreciate it. Perfect. Thank you so much. Well, just a couple of housekeeping items for us to cover before we get started. As a reminder, today's webinar will last about 45 minutes with an additional 10 to 15 minutes reserved at the end for Q&A. To submit your question, please use the Zoom control panel's Q&A feature to send questions directly to our presenters. And we will do our best to answer as many questions as time allows at the end of the presentation. We've also opened up the Zoom chat room, so please feel free to share your ideas and interact with other attendees during the presentation. Just make sure that you have your share settings marked to all attendees and presenters. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and will be shared alongside with today's slide deck sometime in the coming days. We'll give you guys early access to the recording, so just keep an eye on your email and we'll send you a note when this content is available. And finally, please help us out by filling out the quick post-webinar survey. Your comments and ratings are greatly appreciated and influence our topic selection for future webinars. You'll receive a follow-up email encouraging you to submit your survey shortly after we conclude today's session. And now, without further ado, I'll hand it over to Trent.
Thanks, Lizzie, and welcome. We are excited you all are joining us today for this webinar. And we're going to have a party, and I'm excited that I was afraid we were going to throw a party and no one was going to show up. So thank you so much for being here and taking part of the webinar. My name is Trent Gilbert. I'm the Vice President of Student Search Solutions here at Carnegie. In my role at Carnegie, I have the opportunity to work with our clients and help provide leadership in our student search solution, and excited to share just kind of in general about some things that we've been thinking about as it relates to student search. And so I'll hand it over to the rest of my party goers today and let them introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. I am Alexa Poulin. I am the Chief Digital Officer here at Carnegie. I've been at Carnegie for a little bit over 11 years, and I oversee our digital marketing team and helping institutions execute stellar digital advertising campaigns. I also oversee, in partnership with Megan Robinson, our Slate and Search team. And so with that, I'll toss it to you, Megan.
Thanks, Alexa. Hi, everyone. My name is Megan Robinson. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Search and Slate Division here at Carnegie. I've been here 5.5 years, and in my current role, I oversee all of our Search and Slate offerings. And I'm going to pass it to Jared.
Fantastic. Thank you, Megan. Hi, all. My name is Jared Brickman. I'm the SVP of Research here at Carnegie, and my role is to really help our whole company and our clients stay abreast of market and student changes and shifts. And so by kind of understanding those audiences, we can better understand all the wonderful strategies that different folks are using. I will pass it over to Jason.
Thank you, Jared. I'm Jason Frost, VP of Enrollment Strategy. Spent the last few decades working in higher ed, specifically in admissions and enrollment management. I work directly with our clients on strategies and some tactics as it relates to their enrollment management, student search, and also manage our bench of enrollment strategists. Very excited to be with you all today.
Awesome. Well, let's get this party started, shall we? So, you know, when we think about student search and we think about kind of where we're going in the future, I think there's this old adage, we have to look back to see where we've been to know kind of where the future's headed. And so want to spend a little bit of time kind of laying the foundation and laying the groundwork in terms of like, how did we get here with student search, right? And then when I go back and I think about it, at some point in time, at one point in time, we used to go to the school down the street, or we went to the school where our parents went to, right? And maybe that was the only school we applied to, or maybe we applied to that and the school down the street. And the first time we ever stepped foot on campus or learned anything about campus was on move-in day, right? And now we've really progressed, right? In the 70s and the 80s, all of a sudden, institutions really started to kind of recruit, right? High school visits come on the marketplace, and SAT and ACT offer opportunities to purchase names, and college fairs and college nights. And, this is where direct mail and Enter the View book, right? I mean, Stein and Staymates came onto the market and really started delivering view books for colleges and universities to then mail to people. And then what we've done over the decades since is we've just continued to add as the world has shifted, right? And so the 90s, we actually called people, right? Remember that thing, that telephone? We actually called people in terms of our recruitment efforts. We actually started kind of creating some more robust visit programming, and then emails came into being, right? When College Board finally decided, hey, we're going to start licensing emails, College Board wasn't even the one that made the announcement. They let a partner, a vendor, make the announcement that you're going to now be able to get email addresses. And then in the 2000s, we've really kind of created more robust email campaigns, SMS text messaging as part of the recruitment efforts, digital ad space and IP targeting has really come in, social media usage associated with that, and really kind of then these world of microsites and these prospects focused microsites. And now here we are today in 2024. And when we think about student search, we're still doing almost all of those, including the telephone. Some schools are still doing the telephone work, but we're still doing all those things, but we're really getting more sophisticated with our digital ad targeting. Enter the wonderful world of AI chatbots and content, and then obviously a ton more use of video in our search efforts as it relates to using TikTok and Snapchat and Reels and whatever the next platform that we're trying to reach students are that is going to come on the marketplace tomorrow. So what I want to do is I want to pose the question to the group, and let's start our dialogue and conversation there, right? When you put on your future looking goggles, right? When you're looking into the future, you're looking into that crystal ball, from your perspective, what have we been doing for the past however long that from where you sit, you don't think is going to work in the next decade, that I think is important for us as enrollment managers to really kind of be thinking about as we march forward. So let's get started with that. Kind of what's not working, what's not going to work in the future. So Megan, why don't we kick it to you to get started?
Yeah, I don't mind kicking us off. So I would say what comes to mind for me is that you can no longer rely on just senior search. We need to get in front of students earlier and in more expansion markets beyond just your local and feeder geographies that we're used to recruiting from. So that's mine. Jason, I'm sure you have some thoughts though.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel the quote unquote traditional list sources, while they still very much have their place in student search, it is crucial to start incorporating other sources, and those other sources may vary by target population. I think we all observed during the pandemic the rapid expansion of the number of sources. And this was exacerbated because students weren't able to sit for tests, and many campuses in response adopted both temporary and permanent test optional policies. We don't anticipate this expansion of sources declining, quite the opposite. We think it'll continue to grow. And so it's very important that we're not just experimenting, but we're also measuring and deciding what works best as far as these varying sources at your specific campus, and what works best working towards those specific goals that you have relative to enrollment. So on the flip side, then, we can't be reliant on a single source or two any longer.
Right.
I would be remiss if I didn't call out print, even though it's not technically a source. I think the print's pendulum swings back and forth, and I think that we have really seen it experience a resurgence. It is certainly back, and especially when used strategically, is very, very impactful as far as student search is concerned.
Print's not dead, it's just different, right? I mean, I think that's the way to think about that. So
yeah.
Alexa, from where you sit, what do you think is happening?
Well, certainly digital marketing in the last decade, obviously that's come on strong and fiercely, and it's been a really effective way to get in front of our prospective students. How are the landscapes changing? So as I look forward and think ahead, privacy laws have become far more restrictive, and our ability to get especially to that undergraduate prospective under 18 crowd is becoming increasingly more difficult, both from an online standpoint and through digital advertising, but also, as Jason mentioned, with certain name buy restrictions coming on. So we need to get creative. Those students exist out there. We can get in front of them. We just need to probably get in front of them in different ways.
Okay. Jared, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I would jump in to kind of compound with that is the idea that the student profile is also changing in a lot of ways. I mean, Jason brought up the impact of COVID, and post-COVID, we've just seen so many changes in actual student behaviors, and the ways that people are making their decisions are just changing so much. So I think as we continue to look at how we are going to kind of serve these audiences, we have to know what it is they're looking for. And we also have to understand that the audience profile is just changing quite dramatically. And we'll probably talk a little bit more about that as we go through
Right.
the different ways that we can see how that's impacted by things like technology.
Awesome. Yeah. And so I think for me, one of the things that when I think about what we've been doing in the past is we've really been thinking of, in order to come out the bottom of a funnel, you have to go in at the top of a funnel. And I think that one of the conversations that we're having a lot at Carnegie and we're having with our clients is really about the fact that like we're moving on we're moving away from a funnel and we're moving into this kind of like ecosystem. And right, and what does this ecosystem look like? And so, on the next slide, we talk about we show you what this ecosystem looks like. And it's no longer our students just entering in. Yes, some of them are still entering in through name buys, but we have all of these other ways and all these what I like to call ports of entry that are allowing a student to enter into our ecosystem and to enter into our world. And so, obviously a key component as you look through this is, kind of is digital, right? And kind of this digital aspect. And so colleges, as they increase their digital strategy, however that happens to be, Alexa, from your vantage point, right, being the chief digital officer, how have these digital first strategies impacted kind of the traditional student search strategies?
Well, I would start with saying that today's customer, i.e. our prospective students, their parents, any influencers in their house, stakeholders, et cetera, as you mentioned, have so many more ways to engage with an institution and those ports of entry, as you call them. They have so many more ways to discover your institution. And we are very much beholden. They are in the driver's seat. They will engage with you when they want to, where they want to, how they want to. And so we need to, as higher education marketers, need to meet these students where they are. And we know increasingly they're spending all of their time online or research. I mean, research-backed 6 to 8 hours a day are being spent by these students online, and predominantly, sadly, on social media networks, right? So this is where they're spending their time. This is where we can capture their attention. So we, as higher education marketers, need to meet them in those moments and in those places that they are. And that really does require an always-on strategy to make sure that we have that digital presence across these platforms all the time. Now, that's not to say that you have to have the equal amount, can certainly scale up or scale back your digital advertising efforts depending on where you are in the cycle or what time of year it is or what you're trying to promote. But at least keeping the lights on all year is critical. And that could be something as small as just have retargeting going no matter what, all year, 12 months a year. You're going to capture those students with the highest level of intent. They're coming to your website, they're checking you out. So at least you stay in front of those students that are coming to your website. I would advocate, if you do have some budget to go beyond just retargeting all year, to stay present across the most critical platforms throughout the year is really, really important because that's where the students are spending their time. I would also say that having a strong SEO strategy is important too, to drive people or to drive those students to your website. Now, this isn't to say this should replace your traditional methods of direct mail and email, but it is definitely a critical element to be part of that holistic approach.
Yeah, but I think as marketers, though, there's so much that's continuing to change in our world, right? So from a significant standpoint, can you talk about kind of some of the things that are impacting, some of the things that are happening that are impacting kind of how we, from a technology standpoint, about how we think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned it just a minute ago, right? The privacy landscape is certainly shifted and changed, especially in recent years, with restrictions and tightening consumer privacy all over the place with things like GDPR, CCPA. We see this all over the place to protect consumers, and especially being extra careful with the under 18 audiences. So we've seen restrictions a number of years ago from Facebook, Instagram, limiting our ability to load lists. So we can't target that under 18 population the way that we could with custom audiences or lookalike audiences, or just targeting those lists in general across Facebook and Instagram. And that's going to continue to tighten across all the different platforms. And so it's not, as I said before, that we can't get in touch with these students. It's not that we can't influence. The way that we're targeting online these students has to be different. And to be clear, this is, all of us are sort of not in the driver's seat of consumer privacy. So we can get to these students. They do exist out there. Just the way we target them has to be a little bit different and shift our approach.
Okay. Others, what kind of technology, how new technologies or changes in technology are impacting student search?
Yeah, I think I can jump in here, especially because, one of the big things that's on everyone's mind right now is generative AI. It's a big focus in the technology space, and, it's probably something that is behind a large part of this enrollment ecosystem. Carnegie did some research with students in the area of AI recently, and I think what's really interesting is right now we are at what is kind of the crest point of the diffusion of AI being used in the world of college enrollment for students.
Mm-hmm.
So they are looking at, how do I use this? And a lot of students are using it as a way to make sure they don't miss anything. They're using it as that extra partner in gathering them all that information that they think they might miss out on, because they also feel the pressure of the enrollment ecosystem of, there's so many different places I could get information. There's so many different things here. So it's really a time saver, and it's a technology that they're trusting not so much to make the decision for them, but to bring them information to make their decision. We also saw from a lot of students that they are open to institutions using generative AI, but with the really nice caveat that they said, well, we don't want anyone to lose their jobs. Don't be replacing humans, but of course, use it where you need to. And I think that comes down to something I'm sure we'll talk about later, is they see it as a way to potentially hyper-personalize for them and get them the things they really want. I'd say the other thing in the technology space, and this really relates a lot to what Alexa was working through in digital, is this idea of source credibility is really shifting. And so in the area of kind of social media, a lot of students are now trusting those social media posts far more from user-generated content than they are from actual institutional content, which can be a little bit terrifying at times, but it really is a shift in the way that media literacy plays a role in how people are doing this discovery. And I know, Trent, we had talked before about how you like to use that in like the Amazon, I need to buy the right thing. I'm going to
Right,
look
and
at
you
reviews,
you
right?
pay attention to what some random stranger on the internet tells you in terms of why a product's good or bad, and you ignore what the manufacturer, because on some levels, the manufacturer has a spin associated to it, and we all as consumers think that now, right?
Absolutely. And it's hard to then understand, but what is the spin from that audience member now? Because that is
Right.
is a real concern now. And so I think we can all do a better job of helping everyone in the system work through their media literacy skills. And how do we actually evaluate the content that's going around? And that relates back to AI, because we are getting to the space where you might start to see generated AI content that isn't accurate, that is purposefully to mislead. So I think that's something that we're going to have to help students with a lot. And they might have to help us, because they are the kind of the natives of this technology now.
Right. It's a whole new world. Megan, I'm guessing you have something to share about technology. Just taking that as a shot in the dark.
I do. Yeah, before I get to CRMs, which is of course my punchline here, just connecting off what Jared's talking about, I think one of the things that also comes to my mind is the emergence of community platforms and ambassador platforms. Unibuddy is a great example of this, connecting, peers to peers, current students or other prospective students to other admitted students. And I think that allows that authenticity and that trust building, because you can trust what a current student is saying because they're living that experience that you're hopefully signing up to experience. So I think building those connections obviously is just another source to help students, choose their correct institution. But getting to the CRM thing, of course, whether you're using a Slate instance, a Carnegie hosted Slate instance, or another CRM entirely, CRMs are changing everything. So ensuring that data accuracy, segmentation, personalization, all the things that we're talking about, much of that can now be automated and feed the students the instantaneous information resourcing that they're looking to have. It's raising the expectations of what we're delivering to them through their student search journey.
So let's talk about that student search journey, and let's talk a little bit about kind of what that path looks like, right? And this is, if it's no longer this linear moving through a funnel, right? It's very much this squiggly line with inputs and outputs. But right, I think when we think about student search for so long, we've really we focus on one opportunity. And so I think that, my question, I guess, is, Megan, from your point of view, where's the opportunity space in student search, right? If it's not the top of the funnel, like, where is it? And is it true for all schools?
Yeah, I think there's an opportunity to remember the real goal of student search: engaging these students, building affinity with these students, creating connections, and eventually enrolling these students who we hope end up graduating, right? So to do all those things, we have to build a plan to increase engagement and conversions throughout the entire journey. And that means building out and executing those intentional, personalized, multi-channel, all the pieces of the conversation we're having today,
Right.
both in early and late stage part of the pipeline strategy. So, and also just reframing your entire role in all of that, right? Taking ownership of your efforts and all of your data throughout that entire process. So refocusing on yield, not just inquiry conversion, own your data, not just access your data, keep all of that in mind.
And Jason, as you kind of think through this and these opportunities, right? So if you think about these opportunity moments, what are you thinking about as an enrollment manager and working with our clients and kind of talking about student search?
Yeah, so as we're looking, and this is a great diagram, right? As we look at this very non-linear student journey, as a parent of two kiddos who are now in college, you have to be thinking about the parent journey. And in some ways, it parallels the student journey, but there are also points of intersection and points of deviation, and sometimes the timing is also different. So I'm always looking to, okay, where is the student's parent at in their part of the journey? And during the pandemic, again, we saw parent involvement rapidly increase. I don't think we're going to see that decline anytime soon. So during the student journey, we need to be thinking about the parent journey as well, and how we really attract the attention of parents is different than how we might attract the attention of students, and how we continue to engage and nurture the relationship with parents also different than how we are doing that with students. So in some ways, very different communication and messaging, but in other ways, especially those intersection points, we need to make sure that we have a very integrated effort, so that we're really saying the same thing to both populations. So I will
Jason,
continue to beat my parent drum. Sorry.
I was going to say, no, if you didn't say parents, I was going to remind you that you always want to say parents, because 100%. And that also makes me think of high school guidance counselors, right?
Absolutely.
If you're looking all the influencers in the conversation, you should be talking to them too.
And CBOs, and right. And I mean, I think on this parent front, right? I mean, one of the things that I'm spending some time thinking about is the fact that, right, when you read about the largest transfer of wealth happening in the world right now, and so, like, grandparents are coming into play in terms of the college decision making process. And so, it's also that moment of, it's parents, it's those counselors, it's those people in that student's life, and how are we as institutions capturing who those important people are in order to try to continue to communicate with them as part of the process. So I want to talk a little bit about kind of the early pipeline stages, right? And so I think that typically when we think about student search, this is where a lot of people's heads go, right? It goes to this moment of, how are we converting prospects to inquiries, or how are we getting inquiries to applications? And it's very much kind of this early stage. So, my question for you all is, what can we do to kind of tip that scale and in early on in the process, right? I mean, at the end of the day, yes, people are entering from all these various points, but at the same time, there's opportunity moments exist. So what can we be doing? What should schools be thinking about kind of in this early pipeline process as it relates to their work? Jason, you want to kick us off with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Myself, my team, I spend a lot of time in the enrollment analysis stage, and I feel that knowing where you're at right now is so critical before you start looking at where you want to be and what those enrollment goals in particular are going to be. So we spend a lot of time looking at, and not just where we're at right now, but where we have been, right? And so that we're understanding perhaps what populations really do persist through the funnel at very high conversion rates. We want to continue to lean into those, right? Capitalize on
Right.
that. And then also there are populations that aren't persisting. And so, which really represents an opportunity, right? How can we increase those conversion metrics? So I start, before we even get into the conversation of the where, the who, and the how, we need to understand where we've been, where we're at, and then we can start talking about where we'd like to be and these early pipeline strategies.
And I would just
Okay.
layer on top of that, Jason. Sorry, Trent.
No,
When I
go.
hear Jason say where, I'm like, oh, I'm excited. He's also relating to what I kind of see as one of your best early pipeline strategies, which is understanding your geographies really well. So that's
Mm,
like the actual geographic places and what is changing there and trending. Especially, I mean, the chart a few slides back, we talked about the recovery from the demographics cliff.
right.
And we're all kind of concerned about how those things have changed. I think it's really important to know how those demographics have been changing in your backyard, in your key markets, and especially if you wanted to expand to new markets, because I know a lot of people are thinking about, well, fewer folks in our normal service area. How do we go and find more? I think a part of that is being really smart about looking up the demographics and learning about the trends in those different areas you might be thinking about. So I always think an early pipeline strategy is market analysis, doing some type of review of what's going on
Mm,
in those different areas from a geographic standpoint.
Yeah, if I may, Jared, whenever you talk about demographics and early stage, I think a lot of people think that behavioral data and weeding through all of that can't also impact early stage pipeline efforts, but it certainly can. I mean, you're sitting on mounds of behavioral data, actions the students are taking, telling you how interested they are way before they apply. And, we do this with our engaged scoring work, calculating likelihood to apply and enroll. And it's using that historical data, both the demographic and the behavioral, adding weights to them based on historical success, because you know what worked, past students have told you those things, and applying to them to the upcoming class, so you know who to spend those early efforts on, whittle down that group.
and and I also think, right, I think there's also this moment, kind of this early stage, and I think Jason, you mentioned it earlier, is it's not just getting the names you're acquiring from one place.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm sure my team is tired of hearing me talking about diversifying our
Mm,
early stage sources, these different data sources, but also really taking a close look at which sources make the most sense and really deliver the best results for particular targeted populations. It's this one size fits all just isn't the way with it. We're seeing success across all populations any longer. We've talked about sources, but also I think we need to diversify platforms so we really have an integrated approach as well. We mentioned print earlier, but I think text messaging has its place. Identifying the influencers on the students' college search process, like
yeah.
those high school counselors, like their parents, of course. And then interacting, right? Opening up that conversation with those influencers, that is a modern student behavior. So really just making this integrated effort and very much a diversified effort when it comes to these early strategies.
And if I could just,
Alexa from a yep,
I was
go,
just
yep,
going to
good.
jump in here because I'm like chomping
Yeah.
at the bit.
I know, I know. I saw it. I saw it.
One of the things that I think that we have to talk about is your website, right? Your website should be your number one
Oh
source,
man.
because nobody has ever enrolled in a program at your institution or at your institution without having gone to your website, not just once, not just twice, but dozens and dozens of times. So your website ends up being your number one lead source really for that conversion to get those students entered into your inquiry pool, right? And so I know this is easier said than done, but your website needs to be perfect. Your website needs to be easily navigable. It needs to be prospect forward so that prospects can come and find the content that they're looking for and understand and have language that resonates with them. And part of that is not just, the really curated, well-curated copy that your copywriter has written, et cetera, et cetera. And I just answered this in the chat, but it's about user-generated content. It's about you have the best videographers on the planet sitting on your campus right now, and those are your current students. You don't need to bring in a videography crew that you're paying, thousands and thousands of dollars to. Send your students out with an iPhone. That's the best video you could capture, because students are coming to your website not just to learn about the programs that you offer and the majors that you offer. All of that's important, but they want to know if it's a fit. They want to know through the lens of a student, can I see myself here? What is the vibe of this school? And you cannot get that through content necessarily from curated content, and you can't get that from your professional videos that have like the trees and the threes, or the threes and the trees, or whatever it might be. You have to get that through the lens of your current students. So I can't emphasize that enough. Not just through digital advertising and social media platforms to have that, but to have that like living and breathing on your website is so important. But then you need them to convert, right? So now you've given them all the right information and they're excited and they want to know more. You have to have RFI forms at critical points and conversion pages of your website. And I would argue your RFI forms should be as short as humanly possible. And I know that this is up for a lot of discussion because, we want to ask all the questions because we want to know their student, the area of interest and the, student life interest and all the things. But I would say just get them into your inquiry pool, develop and nurture that relationship that gives you permission then to continue to have that conversation and that dialogue, to ask them those questions later. But don't ask them those questions if you don't plan on using that information for future communication. Because if you're going to collect that information from a student, you should use that information to bolster your communication later on.
I think at the end of the day, right, one of the things I think about when we were talking about early pipeline strategies, that this kind of in this theme that's run through a lot of what you all have talked about is kind of this connection moment and these moments of connection. And so, when I think about as a marketer, when I think about how do I connect, I haven't picked up a marketing book that hasn't said, you need to segment your communications. You need to segment, right? And so, call it segment, call it personalization, right? And I think that that's when we think about kind of what's coming next in terms of student search, I think there's this level of personalization, and whether we like it or not, Starbucks has really taught us how to get what we want and how we want it, right? I like my latte with 3 pumps of vanilla, and Megan likes hers with a splash of oat milk. I don't know if that's right or not, by the way. But it is, yeah, sorry, right? So there's this moment where we all take our beverages differently, but we all still, as institutions, we're sending out the same message, thinking that's going to resonate. So the next thing I want to talk about is really this moment of personalization, right? And I mean, everywhere you go, there's opportunities, and technology platforms are doing this all the time, right? I mean, my Netflix account here, in terms of what it's suggesting to me, is very different than the random Netflix account I log into at an Airbnb that's already hooked up, right? And it's this moment of like, wait, why don't we have these options? Well, we do, but Netflix has curated something for me. They've segmented based on my personality what they think I want to watch. So, I think that ultimately that's a big thing to think about, right? When I think about segmentation, one of the challenges I had as an enrollment manager and leading an enrollment shop was, this is a lot of work. How do I do this? So, Jared, can you talk a little bit about kind of how institutions can start with personalization and on a small scale, and what that may look like, and give some good actionable tips for our audience?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely kind of that daunting task of like, oh my gosh, how do we create segmented content? How do we do all of this? And I think this chart or this picture you have on the slide here actually goes through the 3 stages of it really well. And I hope to kind of demystify some of this because it really is something that I think all institutions are already doing, probably like say with their in-state versus out-of-state students. If you're sending them
Right.
different things, you are already segmenting, you're already personalizing. That's at that kind of first baseline level of demographics. It is based on who this person is from a demographic standpoint. How do we choose what content to send them? And how does that differ? Like in your example of Netflix, there's also a regionality of which programs you get.
Right.
My brother works for Netflix, so anytime people bring it up, I'm like, oh, he's the one who did that. He coded that, and that's why you're getting the wrong recommendations from. No. But that's kind of the whole focus on the demographics level is just because a person has this thing, you might change the content that you're creating. The great thing about demographics is they're widely available now. If you need to find those demographics and you can't get them off RFI or other sources, you can probably get them based off the address the student is coming from. We are kind of at that level of lack of data privacy from some perspective. The demographic segmentation should be something that's already available to you. Similarly, at that next step, there's behavioral segmentation, and this is where you're really reacting to something that someone has done. And again, I think most all institutions we work with are already doing this to some extent. They get information from the student and they respond and react to that. And so I think behavioral is really fantastic because it feels very personal to people. As soon as they get that response, they're like, oh, they noticed I did this thing, and that's really specific to me. And so I think, again, behavioral is really accessible and it's data that you should be tracking and should have already based on what you're doing in your different pieces of enrollment. The only downside of behavioral is that it is a little bit more on the wait and see side. You know, you're reactive. If you want to be more on the predictive side, you can get into the world of psychographics, such as your personality, motivation, and beliefs. This is where that really rich audience research needs to come in, and finding out ways that you can start applying that to the findable data of demographics can get a little bit harder. But once you have a system in place, and Carnegie uses what we call DARTs, but you've probably heard of psychographic profiles or persona profiles, is once you have those, being able to apply that as a lens through which all your content goes is that final stage of personalization. It is the ability to say now, not only do we know what to say to Trent Gilbert, we know how to say it so that he's excited about those things on his Netflix recommendations instead of just being like, well, they know I like this genre. Now they're going, wow, and they understand what I like about the genre and why. The psychographic piece, I think, is that final portion of how you start to segment.
I started to get some good recommendations, so Netflix is doing a good job. So, right, I think when so we have these segments, and we're segmenting out. And I think one of the ways that we're able to do that is via CRMs and kind of keeping agile and flexible campaigns with our work, right? And when I started in admissions years ago, everyone had an index card, and we wrote down someone's name and we filed in the file box, and that was our version of a CRM. And we've come a long way since then. So, Megan, when you think about how institutions are leveraging their CRM, whether that's Slate or something else, can you talk about kind of some of those things that are important when thinking about kind of how to leverage their CRM in order to create agile campaigns?
Yeah, absolutely. So first I would say, do what you can to import and own all of the purchase names that you have. Tag them all with the appropriate source indicators so you can track the success of those. Leverage that data, and really any data. There's a great conversation. I think some of the questions coming in are about RFIs and how long they should and shouldn't be. And I think to Alexa's point, they should really only be as long as the data that you're collecting that you're going to use to personalize that student's experience based on the content that you're sending them. Have major content breakouts. Someone asked about the difference between undergrad and grad. That's a big difference, right? If you're going to collect preferred name, make sure you're using preferred name, all that kind of stuff. Running drip campaigns, and that's, if you're not running drip campaigns, let's talk sooner rather than later, but drip campaigns lets the student fall in and out of the population so they get the information they need when they need it and stop getting it when they no longer need it. And then, of course, building reports, right? Having all of that data in your CRM means you can build real-time reports and make real-time pivots based on the data and the patterns that you're seeing.
And I would build on that in the digital space, right? If you're running digital advertising campaigns, you have to look at the performance real time. And that's the beauty of digital advertising too, is that you can make adjustments real time and be super agile. So you can look and see what campaigns are working, what metrics, where the success metrics are, and make shifts and optimizations throughout the entire campaign. You can also look back and you should look month over month, year over year, week to week, to help make some of those informed decisions. And also even making shifts budgetarily, like so allocating budget from one platform to another, depending on what you're seeing in your performance metrics.
So CRMs and whether your digital performance, we're getting all this data, right? So Jason, let's talk data, right? Because I know you and I kind of geek out a little bit when it comes to kind of talking data in terms of what enrollment managers are using, right? And so when I think about kind of what reports should be answering, is that moment of, I want to be able to answer the question of my boss, right? And my boss's boss, right? So the president, the board, and the cabinet, my other fellow cabinet members, but also that random faculty member that has that question, right? I want that data at my fingertips. And I think one of the advantages of running a search campaign out of a CRM gives you all of that data right there. But you and your team spend a lot of time in reports and in reporting. So talk to us a little bit about kind of what questions reporting should answer from your vantage point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to do my best to keep this short because I feel I could talk about this piece all day. Your reports should be integrated, and when I say integrated, aligned with your enrollment goals. And my favorite reports are very lean, and every single metric, and let's say it's a conversion metric, or perhaps it's specific metrics for a specific population, they're all landing in that useful bucket, not just that interesting bucket. So very lean reporting. I want to see those metrics that I can then operationalize if I do see trends that would necessitate a pivot. And even on the email campaign side of things, if we start seeing those trends, we do need to make a pivot. Perhaps we adjust copy, design, something along those lines in order to be responsive, right? In order to run an agile campaign, you have to have these performance-based metrics. And in particular, we're always looking at yield-focused efforts. And so when I say an integrated effort, we're designing our goals as far as enrollment and where we want to be, and then we're focused on yield. And so this all ties back to reporting. Okay, which metrics are most impactful, are most predictive around yield? We're going to be focusing on those.
Right. And so, I think that another thing that we see a lot, and I know that you all encounter this, is this moment of a decision you make today and how you're tracking and capturing data is going to impact you down the road, right? And I think about enrollment management, and our job oftentimes is, it's the long run every day. And it's this moment of what you're doing today or not doing today, or what you did 3 years ago is going to ultimately impact. So can you talk about how big of a deal it is from your vantage point when you're going in to not, how big of a deal is it to have all of your data, especially all of your purchase names, and getting that year over year background?
Yeah, and I think this ties back into what we were talking about earlier, is diversing our sources, and where we're obtaining students' information in order to then interact with them. We need to have all of our data at our fingertips, because I want to see year over year for target populations. I want to see how this particular list from this particular source is performing relative to last year. And maybe the timing doesn't line up, so I need to look at some relative timing, even monthly performance metrics. So not that you're looking at all of that data in a single view, but you do need to have access to it. You do need to have it at your fingertips so that you can really scrutinize where your performance metrics are currently, where they've been in the past, in case you need to make that adjustment.
We all want to make data-driven decisions. How do we do that without having the data?
Right. Yeah,
Exactly.
love that.
Exactly. All right, so let's move down the pipeline, right? I don't want to say down the funnel because the funnel's no more, right? So I have to slap myself on the wrist every time I say that. But right, let's talk some about later pipeline strategies, right? You know, we talked about these opportunity moments, and I think there's opportunity moments kind of after an applicant or after an admit in order to get them to deposit, and then there's that moment just because they pay the deposit, getting them to enroll, and then there's these moments. So when I think about kind of effective late stage strategies, you know, one of the things that comes right to the forefront of my mind that most people, when they think search, they don't think of is financial aid optimization, right? And really, how are you as an institution helping drive yield with regards to your aid and awarding strategy? I think from a student point of view, that realizing the value of your institution and being able to strike that for a family is just absolutely key. And again, if we're just thinking about a top of funnel strategy as it relates to student search, we're not thinking about financial aid optimization. But what are others kind of late pipeline strategies that you're thinking about as it relates to late pipeline?
Yeah, I mentioned a couple already in the early stage because I think you can apply them at both, but just to restate, doing any sort of scoring and taking all of your, whether they're your applicants or your admits, and scoring their likelihood to enroll like we're doing with Engage scoring, it help focus your resources, right? Unibuddy or other peer-to-peer connection platforms, I think that is huge, connecting students to students. And then don't forget about your anti-melt campaigns, both via email and digital. You need to continue to nurture those relationships even after they've chosen you.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd also jump in if we're thinking about potential research opportunities. One of my favorite in the later pipeline is admitted student research. So being able to see what did the actual deposits say versus your declines, how does that data differ? And you'll be kind of surprised at times. You will find people who declined your institution who said you were their top choice. And understanding why is so powerful. And you will have people who actually accepted their offer and said you were their last choice. And understanding that piece is also powerful, but it also leads then into how do you retain that student? Because you've gathered this information that's, I think, so critical. So I would recommend everyone do admitted student research because it is so helpful in understanding, you know, what is your institution doing and seeing. I would say it also then leads into the kind of continued modeling that you can do in the retention world. So how does your student success continue to push people through to graduation by supporting them in a lot of different ways? I think that kind of becomes one of those strategies, and it doesn't feel like an enrollment strategy, but it really can be, because you will learn a lot of things from that process that can then be brought back into that enrollment piece as well, I believe.
And I'll jump in here, and I'm sorry, I probably sound like a broken record at this point, but don't forget about the parents in late stage opportunities, right? In fact, it might even be more important, these latter stages with the parents, than perhaps early stage. You know, they're going to be very focused on deadlines, next steps. If you can't meet the parents where they're at and provide them with that information, I feel that's a misstep as well. And so whether that's via a parent portal or it is via some parents specific pages on your website, you have to get that content in front of them.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'm a frustrated game show host. So we are going to enter what I would like to call the lightning round, right? But for those of you all on watching the webinar, if you have questions, put those in the Q&A or in the chat. We're about to get to those. But here's the lightning round, right? Everyone's going to answer. We're going to do a quick roll round robin. In one word, we'll hyphenate it for Megan, Jared, some others, right? Because we struggle a little bit with one word. But why is student search more than search? Alexa, let's start with you.
Oh, okay. One word, ecosystem. I think with so many ports of entry, we have to evolve student search and recruitment to meet students where they are. Did I do okay?
You did great. Jared.
Well, I would say, if you'll allow me kind of a word that's two words, I would say hyper-personalization. And
we can hyphenate that.
Yeah, a hyphenated word, I think still counts as one. And I think we've covered a lot of the reasons why I think this is so critical to how things are changing in this world. But yeah, that's my word.
Okay. Megan?
I'm gonna use a slash ownership, because, you know, I think you need to own your data. And if you can't own it, slash transparency. You at least need to know how it's working.
Okay, Jason.
I have to go with comprehensive. We have to be thinking about yield from the very first interaction that we have perhaps with a prospective student. So you have to be taking that comprehensive approach to your student search efforts.
Yeah, and I think I'll go with a slash, and that's going to kind of lead into mine a little bit, right? And I think it's yield / enrollment, right? I mean, in my mind, at the end of the day, as enrollment managers, it's not about recruiting an applicant. It's not about recruiting a deposit. On some levels, it's about recruiting a new student, but it really should be about recruiting a graduate. At the end of the day, our work is about recruiting future alumni to our institution, and we need to have a search campaign that is geared and practical for that. So, all right, so we're going to flip the question on you all as an audience. And so in the chat, we want you all to think about what's the one thing that if you could start doing tomorrow in order to think of search differently on your campus. So we'd love to see those answers. So just go on and drop those in the chat. What's that one thing that you could start doing tomorrow to think about search differently on your individual campus? So, and with that, we're actually going to get to some questions because we've had a lively conversation from the Q&A block, which I'm very excited about. And so let me switch over tabs here and jump in on this. So what if your best prospects are people who don't look like your current admitted or enrolled students or live in the same zip codes? How do you find them? So, I mean, I think Jason and Jared you all can probably kind of address this a little bit, right? We see institutions shifting their kind of profile on a regular basis. How do you ultimately find that and take that into account when searching and sourcing names?
Yeah, I think from the research side, that's a really fantastic question. It is kind of the big mystery box that everyone hopes to open. I think that is where you bring in the secondary data, though. Obviously, you have your own historical data, but in the world where you're trying to change what that enrollment looks like, or you're looking for totally new opportunities, that's where you have to bring in that secondary data research from things like the Census Bureau and things that you can find from different sources that are going to give you an edge up on what that area looks like and what those audiences might look like. I think it also comes back to internally working through what do those audience profiles look like to you. I think a lot of times we spend so much thinking that, oh, this is how we're changing our audience, but we don't really understand why our original audience was so successful. And so kind of going back and understanding that, I think, can be really helpful when you go to new audiences to say, what do we carry forward? What do we change because this is a different group? Jason, I'll pass to you.
Yeah, I think we've actually observed this with many campuses, what pre-pandemic versus post-pandemic, and some of those profiles are shifting. And so we're looking to adjust things on the search side of things to accommodate for that. In some cases, I would start to weight behavioral data more heavily than perhaps geodemographic, or a combination thereof, because when we can observe similar student behaviors that are then persisting through not the funnel, the pipeline, then I think that we can certainly lean into that. And also and this, I don't want to shortchange the level of complexity here, and I think Jared was touching on this, work with those different data pieces of different metrics from your different sources. Perhaps it is segment analysis service from the College Board. Perhaps it is mindsets from Encora. And it kind of goes on and on across these other sources. And maybe there's a composite approach to pull all that data together and perhaps make that predictive.
Awesome. All right, Megan, next one's coming to you, right? And so there were some questions about kind of how does this strategy differ based on different populations, right? So I think about, right, adult learner population or graduate population or transfer population. So I wonder if you can touch on kind of thinking about it from those different populations, because we spent bulk of our time really kind of talking about first year students.
Sure. So I think it's really three things, like timing of engagement, right? So engaging with campaigns or outreaches at different times of day. I think adult and grad students are more likely to open a morning email or something like that. It also terms vary, so make sure you're scheduling out your campaigns to touch on different start dates or different semesters or whatever those enrolling the timelines are. Methods of connection is a big difference as well. So I think the graduate and adult audience appreciates more touch points with real people at an institution. So maybe in response to filling out a form where they submit their questions, they actually get a phone call or maybe an outreach through LinkedIn, something like that. And then modality and also ROI. I think you need more content dedicated to those, especially like program and specific outcomes from those graduate programs that you're offering.
Great. Sorry.
Oh yeah, I was going to relate to that, just the platform mix that you're also looking
Yeah.
at. Platform mix varies widely by both age bands and just what people are looking for. I would also say one of the biggest things I'm seeing in kind of the adult ed market right now is you have to differentiate yourself away from, if you're degree granting, away from the certificate world. It is just exploding right now how much people are looking for and kind of choosing the certificate side over the degree side. And so when Megan mentions ROI, I think that's part of the marketing effort that needs to go into that, is how do we prove out that your program and, you know, spending 2 years has that significant ROI over, a 2-week Coursera or whatever it might be certificate.
So the next question I think might have gotten answered in the chat, but I do want to bring it up because it actually came up in 2 different conversations last week in Chicago at Slate Summit, right? And that we were part of. Megan, I think you were part of one of them. But thoughts on multiple RFI forms versus one universal RFI form on different pages for different degrees. And so Alexa, I think you had kind of answered that, but I'm interested to know if you want to answer that live, and then maybe some other people have a couple of.
Well, I certainly hope Megan doesn't disagree with how I answered that question.
I think it depends on the efforts that you have. So in the chat, because I'm not sure if those are visible to everyone, the question was like, should I have an RFI on my homepage and should I just have one? And so 100% you should have one on your homepage. Anywhere where a student is landing, they should definitely get that. So Alexa and I agree there. Good, that's one point. I also think it depends on the tactics in terms of like a specified RFI per program or something like that. One thing that you can do on the Slate side of things is have one RFI and have query string parameters within the URL so that it looks like it's a different RFI every time, but it's only because it's pre-populating the program based on the page that you're landing on. So I think there's some technical capabilities to allow you to have less RFIs, but they still be dedicated to the campaigns.
Awesome. Thanks, Megan, and thank you all very much for joining us today. We appreciate you all taking the time out of your busy day and out of your summer. A couple of resources for you that we will post in the chat, as well as will be in the slide deck, is if you want to dive deeper about student search and about kind of how we're thinking, we have a blog post on 6 student search and enrollment marketing strategies for you to look at. It's written by this really brilliant person that I really encourage you to go read. Someone maybe on this chat. On this webinar. The next one is you can learn more about our Carnegie Student Search offering on our website. And if you want to explore partnerships with us, we'd love to partner with you. We'd love to talk and engage in more conversations specific to you and your institution. So please feel free to get in touch with us, get in touch with me, and get in touch with any of us. And we wish you the best of luck as it relates to finalizing your class for fall of 24, thinking about 25, 26, 27, and beyond. So thanks so much for joining us today, and we wish you well.